Most people think you need Swiss money to look expensive. That real luxury starts at $2,000, maybe more. And to be fair, that's what the industry wants you to believe. But here's what doesn't get talked about enough. Seiko has been quietly producing watches that, on the wrist, look and feel far more expensive than their price tag suggests. We're talking about finishing that catches light like luxury pieces, dials that rival watches triple the price, and proportions that just feel right. The problem isn't quality, it's perception. So today, we're breaking down 5 Seiko watches that genuinely look 3 times more expensive than they are. And by the end of this list, you might start questioning why people overspend in the first place. Let's start with one that completely redefines what affordable can look like. If you think affordable watches can't look refined, this Seiko challenges that immediately. The Prospex SPB 155, better known as the Baby Alpinist, doesn't rely on flash or oversized proportions to feel premium. It leans on balance, and that becomes obvious the moment you see it in person. At 38 millimeters, the case size feels deliberate, compact but not small, sporty but not aggressive. It sits naturally on the wrist without demanding attention. Inside, you get Seiko's 6R35 automatic movement with a 70-hour power reserve. It hacks. It hand wins. It does exactly what a modern mechanical watch should do, reliably and without drama. But the real story isn't the movement, it's the dial. That deep green sunburst finish shifts depending on the light. In low light, it looks almost forest dark. Under brighter angles, it opens up and reveals a metallic depth that feels far more expensive than its price bracket. The applied markers are clean, the cathedral-style hands give it vintage character without feeling forced, and the overall symmetry feels considered, not rushed. Then there's something most people overlook: 200 meters of water resistance. This isn't just a dressy field-style piece. It's built to handle real use. That capability gives it a quiet confidence that many watches in this range don't quite have. And this is where perception shifts. When you compare it to Swiss sport watches at double the price, you expect to feel compromised somewhere: finishing, dial quality, proportions. But with the SPB 155, that entry-level feeling never really shows up. It doesn't try to look expensive. It simply feels complete. And that's what makes it more dangerous than people expect. If you still think Seiko only dominates in tool watches, this is where that idea starts to fall apart. The Presage sharp-edged series doesn't feel sporty. It feels intentional. Powered by the same 6R35 automatic movement with a 70-hour power reserve, it already has solid mechanical credibility. But again, specs aren't what make this watch special. It's the dial. Seiko uses a traditional Japanese Asanoa hemp leaf pattern, and this isn't a flat printed texture. It reflects light in layers. Depending on the angle, the dial almost changes personality, sometimes sharp and structured, sometimes soft and dimensional. That level of detail is rare at this price. The case lives up to the name: sharp-edged, strong lines, defined transitions, polished bevels that catch light cleanly against brushed surfaces. The finishing feels architectural, more sculpted than stamped. On the wrist, it wears refined without feeling fragile. Around 39 mm, it hits that sweet spot between modern and classic sizing. Slim enough to slide under a cuff, solid enough to feel substantial. And here's the important part. When you see this watch in person, it doesn't feel like a stepping stone to something better. It feels finished. Compare it to Swiss dress watches well above its price bracket, and what surprises you isn't what's missing. It's what's already there: texture, precision, depth. It doesn't scream luxury. It expresses it quietly. And that quiet confidence is exactly what makes it look far more expensive than it actually is. If you think Seiko chronographs are just affordable alternatives, this is the model that challenges that idea immediately. The Prospex Speedtimer Panda leans into classic racing chronograph design, but it does it with restraint. Nothing feels exaggerated. Nothing feels forced. At 39 mm, the case size is extremely well judged, compact enough to feel vintage-inspired, but modern enough to feel solid on the wrist. It wears balanced, not oversized, and that alone already separates it from many chronographs in this category. Inside, it runs on Seiko's V192 solar chronograph movement. That means no regular battery changes, no winding routine. just light-powered reliability that makes it easy to live with day to day. But the real hook is the dial. The crisp white base paired with black subdials creates that iconic Panda contrast people usually associate with much more expensive racing chronographs. The layout feels clean and symmetrical. The subdials don't look cramped. The red accents add energy without turning it into a gimmick. Then you notice the curved sapphire crystal. It adds dimension, catches reflections, and subtly elevates the whole watch beyond what you expect at this price. On the wrist, it feels tight and composed. The pushers have a reassuring click. The case finishing is cleaner than most assume before handling it in person. And this is where perception shifts. When you compare it to chronographs at nearly double the price, you expect to see obvious compromises somewhere. With the Speedtimer, that entry-level feeling just doesn't jump out at you. It doesn't try to imitate luxury. It simply delivers a well-executed sports chronograph that feels far more premium than its price tag suggests. If you think affordable GMT watches are usually where brands start cutting corners, this Seiko makes that assumption harder to hold. The Prospex 1968 SPB 381 GMT is inspired by Seiko's 1968 professional diver heritage, and you can feel that tool watch DNA immediately. At 42 mm, it has presence, but it's not sloppy or oversized. The case proportions are controlled, and the way it sits on the wrist feels intentional rather than bulky. Inside, you get the 6R54 automatic movement with true GMT functionality. That detail matters. This isn't just a collar GMT where you adjust the 24-hour hand. This is a traveler-style GMT, meaning the local hour hand jumps independently. For anyone who actually travels, that's a serious upgrade, and it's not common at this price point. 200 meters of water resistance, ceramic bezel insert, solid bracelet construction. The ceramic bezel alone elevates the watch visually. It reflects light differently than aluminum, giving it a sharper, more refined appearance. On the wrist, it feels engineered. The weight is reassuring. The finishing transitions between brushed and polished surfaces are clean and deliberate. And this is where the perception shift happens. When you compare it to Swiss GMT divers in the next price bracket, you expect to see where savings were made. But visually and functionally, the SPB 381 doesn't present itself as a compromise. It doesn't feel like a budget GMT. It feels like a professional travel diver that just happens to sit in a more accessible category. And that distinction is exactly what makes it dangerous for brands charging a lot more. If you still think Seiko can't compete visually with luxury Swiss sports watches, the Prospex LX line is where that narrative starts to break. This isn't entry-level Seiko. This isn't even mid-range Seiko. The LX line was developed with input from Seiko's high-end watchmaking division, and you can see that influence immediately in the case architecture and finishing. Many models use lightweight titanium instead of standard stainless steel. That changes the feel on the wrist instantly. Strong, solid, but noticeably more refined in weight distribution. Depending on the reference, you'll find high-grade automatic calibers and even spring drive in certain versions. Technology that blends mechanical engineering with quartz-level accuracy. 300 meters of water resistance on the diver models, sapphire crystal. Professional specifications across the board. But the real story is the finishing. The case geometry is sharper. The transitions between brushed and polished surfaces are more controlled. The light play across the edges feels deliberate, closer to luxury territory than most people expect when they hear the name Seiko. On the wrist, it carries presence. Not loud, not flashy, just confident. And this is where the final perception shift happens. Because when you place a Prospex LX next to Swiss sports watches at significantly higher prices, the gap doesn't feel as wide as it should. It doesn't look like a brand trying to imitate luxury. It looks like a brand that knows exactly how far it can push its own engineering without inflating the price beyond reason. And that's the real takeaway from this entire list. Seiko doesn't just make affordable watches, it makes watches that quietly challenge what expensive is supposed to look like.